Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're jumping straight into a brand new explainer, and we are unpacking a massively viral and honestly highly debated segment from Blaze TV. It features host Glenn Beck and Canadian journalist Ezra Levant. We're going to get right to the absolute core of their arguments regarding a pretty bizarre incident. We're talking about a Commonwealth citizen being suddenly banned from entering the United Kingdom. It's a wild situation, so let's just dive right in and see exactly what's going on. Right off the bat, we're hit with this central mystery, and it completely hooks you into the story. Why would a journalist, specifically a citizen of Canada, which, remember, is a Commonwealth nation that literally shares a monarch with the UK, why would they be blocked from simply flying into London just to observe and report on a political rally? Because according to Levant, he had zero intention of speaking or participating. He just wanted to witness the whole shebang. So to really understand the host's perspective on this ban, we first have to look at how Levant positions his own track record. Levant wastes no time establishing his credibility here. He wants you to know he's not just some random guy with a microphone. He's actually a recipient of the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal. He points out that he received this specific honor because about 20 years ago he published some controversial cartoons and basically refused to bend the knee when pressured. You know, the irony here is pretty rich, right? A man recognized by the late Queen specifically for defending free speech is now being denied entry by her government under the current Prime Minister. Okay, so how exactly was he blocked? Well, it all starts with an ETA, or Electronic Travel Authorization. Think of this as a super light, totally routine visa process for visitors traveling to the UK from designated safe countries like Canada or the US. It's normally a breeze. But on the Friday, right before his trip, Levant claims his previously valid ETA was just suddenly and unexpectedly revoked by the UK Home Office. No direct reason given. He was basically just told, hey, you can still apply for a standard visa. And that, right there, kicks off a completely chaotic bureaucratic scramble. Let's walk through the escalating hurdles Levant says he had to jump through. First up, he's forced to submit a full regular visa application. And we're talking over 100 intrusive questions here about his family, his past 10 years of travel, basically his entire life story. Second, he pays a massive fee for super priority processing to speed things up. Third, he physically goes in to get fingerprinted. And finally, he just waits and waits. The hosts argue this wasn't just your standard administrative red tape. They are convinced it was an intentional stalling tactic. And this point is absolutely driven home by this number, 1,000 British pounds. That is the stark, out-of-pocket financial hit Levant took to pay the UK government specifically for a guaranteed 24-hour turnaround on his application. He already had his flights booked. His hotel was booked. Yet, as the days just ticked by, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, literally, right up until his flight on Friday, crickets. The results never came. To Levant and Beck, there's no way this was just administrative incompetence. They argue it was a deliberate, targeted stall, ordered from the very top. But you know, to fully grasp the gravity of this incident, we really have to zoom out for a second. The hosts absolutely do not view this isolated visa issue as just some simple spat over paperwork. Not at all. They frame Levant's travel ban as a glaring symptom of a much, much larger global ideological clash. They argue that Western democracies are basically in a tug of war over the very definition of free speech, drawing a really sharp line between how speech is handled in North America versus how it's increasingly being managed over in the United Kingdom. And the contrast they paint is stark. During their discussion, Glenn Beck goes out of his way to passionately praise the U.S. First Amendment. He describes it as the foundational tool used to defend all other freedoms, literally saying it's more important than almost anything else. The UK, however, they don't have a single constitutional equivalent to the First Amendment, and because of that, the hosts portray current UK speech laws as totally draconian. They argue that British citizens are increasingly facing dispersal orders or even jail time for what Levant calls word crimes. To back up this whole word crimes claim, Levant drops a staggering statistic from the Times of London. He points out that in the United Kingdom, an average of 30 people are arrested every single day just for things they post on social media. Think about that. 30 people a day. He even argues that not even openly authoritarian regimes arrest that many of their own citizens daily, strictly for internet commentary. It really paints a picture of a nation where everyday speech is heavily monitored and aggressively policed. Which brings us perfectly to a specific phrase getting thrown around a lot in this broadcast: two-tiered justice. So what does that mean?
It's the allegation that a government enforces its laws completely selectively. In this context, Levant and Beck are making the case that the UK government aggressively targets its political critics, specifically people speaking out against mass immigration, while taking a totally hands-off, soft approach to massive, disruptive marches organized by groups they consider, politically untouchable.
Let's look at exactly how they break this down. For the upcoming anti-immigration rally that Levant wanted to cover, he notes the government dispatched a whopping 4,000 police officers. 4,000! Yet he claims that for these massive, weekly anti-Semitic marches featuring up to 100,000 people, the police seemingly, in his words, refused to show themselves just to avoid antagonizing the crowds. Now, remember, we are exploring the host's perspective in this explainer, and their argument is that the policing system right now is deeply, fundamentally unbalanced.
But hey, let's flip the coin and look at the government's stated position here. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer came out and strongly condemned the very march Levant was trying to attend. Starmer didn't mince words. He stated that the organizers included convicted thugs and racists who were just peddling hatred. He promised that while the government wouldn't stand in the way of peaceful protest, they absolutely would use the full force of the law against any manifested violence and division. Now, I want you to compare that directly to Ezra Levant's description of the exact same group of people. He says, it's moms and kids and grandmas and grandpas and veterans. So much love. I mean, the absolute whiplash between these two narratives is wild. The government is framing it as this dangerous gathering of hateful thugs that requires thousands of riot police, while the hosts are framing it as a peaceful, loving assembly of concerned, everyday citizens. Because of this massive divide, Levant proposes a highly controversial theory. He calls it political policing. He's essentially arguing that the police are no longer politically independent in the UK. He points out a specific fact. Prime Minister Starmer's party recently suffered a massive electoral wipeout, losing 1,500 council seats. So, Levant suggests Starmer is basically lashing out. His theory? The massive police presence isn't actually about public safety. It's an attempt to manufacture a false flag event to distract from his own sinking popularity and to demonize his political opponents. And that naturally leads us into another huge concept in their discussion, lawfare. This is when the legal system is weaponized to tie up or harass your political adversaries. Levant uses a really specific example here, British activist and citizen journalist Tommy Robinson. According to Levant, the government used sweeping anti-terrorism laws to charge Robinson, but not for an act of terror. No, simply because he refused to provide the passcode to his iPhone without a court order. For the hosts, this is a prime example of the government stretching the law to its absolute breaking point just to punish dissenters. Okay, so facing revoked visas, massive legal fees, and what they clearly view as a hostile two-tier justice system, what's the response? The conversation shifts gears here from outlining the problem to detailing the actual pushback. Levant makes it crystal clear to Glenn Beck that he isn't going to just take this ban lying down and stay quiet over in Canada. He outlines a strategy of fighting back both legally and ideologically, relying on a pretty strong network of allies on the ground in the UK. He points out that he's definitely not alone in this fight. First, the Free Speech Union, which is an organization based in the UK, officially agreed to take his case and fired off an emergency letter to the Home Office. Second, he praises the network GB News for bravely continuing to fight against government censorship on the airwaves. And on the political front, he points to the rising electoral success of Reform UK, a party that's actively pushing back against mass emigration. To Levant, these are beacons of hope. They prove that a real, organized resistance exists. Now, you might be wondering, why should an American, or really anyone outside the UK, care about any of this? Well, Levant describes watching the UK right now as peering into a dystopian time machine. That is a heavy phrase. The hosts argue that these crackdowns on speech, the strategic use of visas to block journalists, this two-tier policing, these aren't just isolated British problems. They firmly believe the UK is simply 5 to 10 years ahead on a very bad path, and it serves as a dire warning for what's coming to all Western democracies if citizens don't wake up and protect their rights. But ultimately, the hosts do conclude on a note of rallying optimism. There is a silver lining here for them. Glenn Beck argues that heavy-handed government actions, like literally banning a journalist, well, they always backfire. They suggest that these crackdowns are actually causing a global awakening. By overplaying their hand, they argue the global elite are unintentionally causing freedom-loving people all over the world to unite and recognize the broader agenda at play. So they don't see this as the end of the fight at all. They see it as the catalyst for a much larger unified pushback. And that brings us to our final thought for this explainer. We've walked through some really intense arguments, claiming that political policing and lawfare are destroying free speech. But we've also seen the UK government stance, arguing they're taking totally legitimate, necessary steps to protect the public from thugs and violent hatred. So, what do you think? Where does the truth actually lie? Are we witnessing the death of free expression in Western democracies, or just a government trying to maintain public safety in a polarized world? It is a complex clash of realities for sure, and we'll leave it to you to decide. Thanks so much for joining us.